The date was February 21st, 1965, a Sunday that hung heavy with the gray, suffocating portent of a coming storm. The Audubon Ballroom on Broadway and 165th Street was packed, a sweltering ocean of 400 souls waiting for the words of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, the man the world still knew, feared, and loved as Malcolm X. But high above the heads of the faithful, hidden in the dusty, cramped darkness of the projection booth, sat the one man Malcolm had explicitly banned from the building. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was not there to pray. He was there to sin, so that the prophet could live. Bumpy sat on a wooden crate, his expensive suit collecting the dust of decades. Beside him lay Preacher, a marksman from the deepest trenches of Harlem, a man who could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 yards. Through the narrow rectangular glass of the projection port, they had a god's-eye view of the stage. The air in the booth was stale, smelling of old celluloid and gun oil. Bumpy had received the intel 3 days prior, whispers from the Nation of Islam, murmurs from the NYPD wiretaps that his invisible army had intercepted. They were coming for Red today. And since Red was too stubborn to accept bodyguards, Bumpy had decided to be his guardian angel from the rafters.
"I have him, boss," Preacher whispered, his voice tight.
Through the telescopic sight of his high-powered rifle, the crosshairs were settling on the chest of a man in the front row. It was Thomas Hagen. He was fidgeting, sweating, his hand dipping repeatedly into his coat pocket. "He's nervous. He's gonna move. Just give the word, Bumpy. 1 round, clean. No one will even know where it came from." Bumpy watched through a pair of binoculars. He saw the tension in Hagen's shoulders. He saw the hate. But he also saw something else. Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's pregnant wife, and his 4 daughters sitting nearby. A firefight initiated from the balcony could turn the front row into a slaughterhouse. But Bumpy had run the numbers. Preacher was surgical. They could drop Hagen before he even stood up. "Wait," Bumpy commanded, his voice a low rumble. "Wait for the move." Down below, the atmosphere shifted. Malcolm walked onto the stage. He looked tired, the weight of the world etching deep canyons into his face, but his eyes were clear. He offered the greeting of peace. "Assalamu alaikum." The crowd roared back, "Wa alaikum salam." Then the disturbance began. A staged shout from the crowd. "Nigger, get your hand out of my pocket!" "Now," Preacher hissed. "He's moving. He's drawing." Bumpy saw it. Hagen was standing up, pulling a sawed-off shotgun from under his coat. It was a clumsy, brutal weapon. Preacher's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot was lined up perfectly. It would take a fraction of a second to end the threat, to splatter Hagen's brains across the floor and save the life of the most important black man in America. "Take the shot!" Bumpy opened his mouth to say, but in that split second, time warped. It stretched and froze. Malcolm X, hearing the commotion, didn't look at the attackers. He didn't look at his wife. He looked up. Straight up. His eyes locked onto the small, dark rectangle of the projection booth glass. He couldn't have seen Bumpy in the shadows, yet he knew. He knew his old friend was there, watching, ready to unleash violence in his name. And Malcolm shook his head. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible. But to Bumpy, it was a shout louder than thunder. It was a look of profound, terrifying clarity. In that gaze, Malcolm conveyed a final political will. If you shoot him, Bumpy, you validate them. If a gangster saves me, the newspapers will call this a hoodlum turf war. My message dies. My legacy becomes dirty. I must be a martyr, not a survivor of a shootout. "Boss, he's aiming!" Preacher shouted, panic rising in his voice. "I have the shot. Let me take it." Bumpy's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in his body screamed to save his friend. He had the power of life and death in his hands. He could save Red. He could send him home to his children tonight. All he had to do was say yes. But the shake of the head paralyzed him. It was a command from a higher power. To save Malcolm, the man, Bumpy would have to destroy Malcolm, the icon. With a groan that sounded like his soul tearing in half, Bumpy reached out and clamped his massive hand over the barrel of Preacher's rifle, forcing it down. "Stand down," Bumpy whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Don't shoot." "Bumpy, he's gonna—" "I said stand down!" Boom! The shotgun blast from the floor was deafening. It tore through the wooden podium and slammed into Malcolm's chest. The sound was followed immediately by the crack of Lugers and the chaotic screaming of the crowd. Malcolm fell backward, his hands clutching his chest, his life spilling out onto the stage floor. In the projection booth, Bumpy Johnson stood, frozen. He watched his friend fall. He watched the light go out of the world. He gripped the metal railing of the booth so hard that the rust cut into his palms, drawing blood that mixed with his sweat. A single tear, hot and angry, tracked through the scars on his cheek. He had possessed the bullet that could have changed history, and he had been forced to swallow it. That unspent bullet was heavier than the entire world. "Pack up," Bumpy said, his voice dead. "Leave the gun. We go." "Boss?" Preacher was shaking, looking down at the carnage. "We could've." "We couldn't," Bumpy snapped, turning away from the window so he wouldn't have to see Malcolm's body twitching. He didn't want to be saved by us. But the story didn't end in the booth. Down on the floor, it was bedlam. The crowd had caught Hagen and was beating him to a pulp. Police sirens were wailing. People were fleeing in terror. Bumpy descended the back stairs, buttoning his jacket, transforming from the sniper in the shadows back into the King of Harlem. He pushed through the doors into the ballroom. He didn't run away. He walked straight into the center of the panic. He saw Betty Shabazz screaming, trying to reach her dying husband, covering her children with her own body. The crowd was surging around them, dangerous and blind. "Make a hole!" Bumpy roared. The voice that had commanded street corners for 30 years cut through the hysteria. He waded into the crowd, using his broad shoulders to shove men aside. He reached Betty. "Betty!" he shouted, grabbing her arm, shielding her from the crushing press of bodies. "He's gone! You have to look at the children! Look at me!" He formed a human wall around the grieving widow and the terrified girls. His eyes dared anyone to push closer. He guided them through the madness, a lighthouse in a hurricane, delivering them to the waiting hands of the arriving medics and family friends. He did what he could for the living because he had been forbidden to help the dying. As the police dragged a bloodied, half-conscious Thomas Hagen past them towards the exit, Bumpy stopped. The officers, recognizing the godfather of Harlem, hesitated for a brief second. Bumpy stepped close to Hagen. He didn't strike him. He leaned in, his face inches from the assassin's ear. Bumpy's eyes were dry now, devoid of humanity, filled only with a cold, abyssal darkness. "You think you won," Bumpy whispered, his voice sounding like gravel grinding on bone. "You think killing him makes you a hero. But hear me, boy. I could have ended you from the balcony. I let you live, and that is your curse." Hagen looked up, eyes swollen, meeting the gaze of the devil himself. "You will live," Bumpy promised, low and terrifying. "You will go to prison, and you will stay there. You will watch the seasons change through iron bars. You will grow old, and every day you will see his face on the news. You will see his words on the walls. You will see 1,000,000 Malcolms rise from the blood you spilled today. I will make sure you don't die. I will make sure you live long enough to realize that you didn't kill a man. You created a god. And that regret will be your cellmate until the day you rot.
Bumpy stepped back, letting the cops drag the assassin away.
He stood alone in the back of the Audubon ballroom for a moment, looking at the empty stage where the blood was still wet. He adjusted his cuffs, the phantom weight of the unspent bullet still dragging at his heart. He had respected his friend's wish. He had let the bullet stay in the chamber. And as he walked out into the cold February air, Bumpy Johnson knew that was the hardest trigger he had never pulled.